A man kicked out his wife because she was poor. She was broken, but she had yet to learn what she was about to inherit. Genevieve and her son Sterling trudged up the front steps of their cozy home, arms laden with grocery bags. The sun hung low in the sky, its golden light stretching long shadows across the sidewalk. The warm evening breeze carried the faint scent of freshly cut grass, a contrast to the unsettling feeling creeping up Genevieve's spine. She shifted the weight of the bags and fumbled for her keys. "Hold on, buddy. Let me—" Before she could finish, Sterling, ever the impatient one, reached for the door handle and twisted. Expecting it to be locked as usual, he was caught off guard when the door swung open with ease. Genevieve froze, her brows knitting together. Her grip on the keys tightened. "That's odd," she muttered. "John must have come home early." Sterling, oblivious to her unease, dashed inside, dropping his backpack by the door. Genevieve hesitated for just a second before following, a strange sense of apprehension bubbling in her chest. They set the groceries on the kitchen counter, and Genevieve let out a slow breath. Maybe she was overthinking things. Maybe John had just forgotten to lock up. She rubbed her temple and decided she deserved a few moments to unwind before starting dinner. But as she stepped into the living room, her body went rigid. John was there, sprawled on the sofa, but he wasn't alone. Beside him sat a woman Genevieve had never seen before, a woman far too comfortable in Genevieve's home. She leaned toward John, laughing softly, the sound like nails on a chalkboard. Genevieve's heart slammed against her ribs, her breath catching in her throat. "Excuse me," she said, her voice deceptively calm. "What the hell is going on here?" The woman looked up, her lips curving into an infuriatingly slow smile. There was something in her eyes, something smug, as if she already knew how this was going to play out. John didn't move, didn't even look startled. He simply exhaled, rubbing his temples as if this was an inconvenience rather than a moment that could shatter everything. Genevieve's fingers curled into fists. 1,000 questions crashed through her mind, but only one mattered right now. Time seemed to stretch on forever as she waited for John to react. Finally he stood, his face serious, meeting Genevieve's eyes squarely. The look on his face confirmed her fears. This was no joke. Genevieve stood frozen, her eyes locked on John as he introduced the woman sitting next to him with a casualness that stung her deeply. "Genevieve, this is my girlfriend Nisterling. Nisterling. This is my soon ex-wife Genevieve," John said, his voice devoid of any emotion. Genevieve's mind reeled, unable to grasp the full scope of what was happening. "Wait, I don't get it. So, you're telling me you brought your girlfriend to our house," she began, her voice trembling with disbelief and hurt. John interrupted sharply. "My house, Genevieve. It's my house and... Look, I've tried working it out and clearly it failed. I'm sorry, but we have to move on," he declared, his smile forced and empty. The words hit Genevieve like a physical blow. Her heart raced painfully, the shock of his betrayal feeling as devastating as losing a beloved family member. She struggled to understand how everything had changed so quickly. Just yesterday they were laughing together, sharing moments of joy. Confusion clouded her thoughts. "How long has this been going on?" she managed to ask, her voice a mix of anger and sorrow. John sighed heavily, his expression turning sour as he faced Genevieve's questioning. "It's been happening on the side," he admitted reluctantly. "Why didn't you tell me?" Genevieve pressed, needing answers, her voice rising with each word. John's irritation grew visible. He shifted uncomfortably, clearly not liking the direction of the conversation. "Genevieve, this isn't the time or place to discuss this," he said dismissively, trying to end the conversation. Genevieve tried to speak, her voice wavering with emotion. "Who is she? And how can you just stand there, unaffected?" she asked, her eyes darting between John and the woman beside him. Nisterling opened her mouth to respond, but before she could get a word out, John intervened. He turned towards Nisterling, his hands tightening on her waist as he faced Genevieve squarely. His voice was icy, each word deliberate and cutting. "Genevieve, You had your chance. You didn't meet my expectations, he stated bluntly. Nistling can provide what I need. The harshness of his words was like a slap to Genevieve's face, leaving her reeling from the cold dismissal of the time they had been together. I don't understand, John. After all these years together, how can you say this? What am I supposed to tell Sterling? She asked, her voice quivering on the verge of tears. John's response was cold and dismissive. Tell him whatever you think is best. I'm not his father, Genevieve. What kind of question is that? He snapped, his anger rising. John, is this really you talking? Can you hear what you're saying? Genevieve pleaded, tears already spilling down her cheeks. John closed his eyes, a gesture of annoyance. Oh, come on, Genevieve. Are you trying to make me feel guilty about Sterling now? He's not my blood. He was never going to be my son. How can you be so naive? He retorted harshly. Genevieve stood there, sobbing quietly, her head bowed in despair. I have no interest in your life anymore. Do me a favor, will you? John paused, glancing past Genevieve. Unseen by them until now, 7-year-old Sterling had overheard everything. As Genevieve turned, she saw her son peeking around the corner. His attempt to smile did little to mask the tears brimming in his eyes. Baby. Genevieve's voice broke as he walked into her arms. I'm so sorry, baby. John cleared his throat loudly, interrupting the tender moment. Sorry to cut into your emotional moment, but you need to pack your bags now. Genevieve looked up at John through her tears, stunned. What do you mean, John? We have nowhere else to go. Can't you give us some time? She implored, her embrace tightening around her son. This is over, Genevieve. If you put in some effort, perhaps you could find a place to go, like that old shack you've inherited. Genevieve gasped softly, taking a step back as the gears in her head began to work their way. It became clearer at that point what the man before her was all about. Without a word said, she turned on her heels, holding her son's hand as she made her way to the bedroom that they shared. Go gather your things, Sterling. Where would we go, Mom? Sterling asked with a smile, but his eyes were in tears. Genevieve swallowed, looking away from the boy staring innocently at her. We will be fine, baby. Just go get your things. As soon as she heard the soft click of the door, she crumbled to the ground. It all looked like a nightmare that she couldn't even wake up from. She lay there sobbing and remembering how it all started. It was hard for her to even remarry after the death of her first husband. No man seemed to come near to treating her right until John came along. It was a warm summer evening, and she was attending a mutual friend's birthday party. She was initially hesitant to go because of Sterling, but her friend's persistent nudging finally won her over. He was the first person she spotted as she walked into the garden. He was tall, dark-haired, and had piercing blue eyes that seemed to see right through her. As if he knew she was watching him, he walked up to her with a smile on his face. John was charming and witty, making her laugh with ease for the first time in a year and a half. She remembered the way her heart skipped a beat when he took her hand, the way his smile made her feel like she was home to him. They danced under the stars that evening, swaying gently to the music as their eyes were locked on each other. It was as if time stood still, and all that mattered was two of them. As the night drew to a close, he walked her over to her car. Having exchanged numbers, he later asked her on a proper date. She remembered feeling like she was walking on air. However, that didn't last for long as she realized that she never told him about her son. After 2 dates, she garnered up courage and told him everything about herself, including her son and her inheritance. Looking back now, she knew that she should have been careful when he was quick to dismiss those things, saying that he only loved her. She brushed off everything that was glaring, trying to convince herself that the love that they shared was wonderful. Until the day that they went to check the house that she inherited from her father. She couldn't help but remember how disgusted he looked when they got there. It wasn't what they both expected at all, but he looked more heartbroken and annoyed at the same time. It was the same man that was so caring and kind to her that now held a woman in his hands. Their laughter made its way up to their room, breaking her heart more. Never would she have thought that all her now ex-husband wanted was her inheritance. Everything he did was just a complete lie. "How did I not realize this before?" she whimpered, trying to get to her feet. She couldn't take all that was happening anymore, so she needed to do what was asked of her. Genevieve's memories turned to bitter resentment as she stormed into her bedroom, yanking open the closet door with a force that sent hangers clattering to the floor. She began to toss clothes into a suitcase angrily. She couldn't believe she had wasted years on John's lies and deceit. As she packed, her head raced with all the signs she had ignored, all the times she had made excuses for his behavior. Her anger and hurt boiled over, manifesting in the fierce way she crammed clothes into the bag, as if trying to squeeze out all the pain and betrayal. Just as she was about to zip the suitcase shut, a small voice interrupted her tumultuous thoughts. "Mum?" Sterling's hesitant tone broke through her fury, and she turned to see her son standing in the doorway, his backpack slung over his shoulder and another suitcase just by him. "It's all right, baby. I'm all ready." She closed her suitcase shut, moving it towards the door. They made it out of the house, and it took all of her willpower not to look back. Genevieve pulled out of the driveway, leaving behind the home that she and Sterling had spent 4 years in. The silence in the car continued to increase, punctuated only by Sterling's occasional sniffle. Her heart ached, knowing that her son was hurting as much as she was, and she couldn't do anything to make it go away. "Mum, are we never coming back home?" Sterling asked finally, trembling slightly. Genevieve took a deep breath, trying to find the right words. "John and I are having some problems, buddy. We need to get away for a bit." She paused, collecting her thoughts. "He wasn't being honest with us, Sterling. He was hurting us both, and it was best of us to leave." "Is it because of her?" His eyes narrowed as he looked at her through the mirror. She noticed that his face was already pale, as her heart skipped a beat. "Yes, sweetie, it is," she whispered softly. "But we'll get through together, okay? We'll make a better life. Just the two of us." As they drove through the streets, she began to point out to the other houses in the new area that they were moving to, all in a bid to get her son to speak again. "Do you remember the place that I told you that your grandfather left us?" Sterling merely nodded, looking out the window. "That's where we would be staying. It's going to be fun." Not so long after that, the house that John referred to as an old shack came into view. Genevieve knew that it wasn't much, but it was a very good place to start over, a place to heal. She pulled into the driveway, turning off the engine. "We're here, buddy." She stamped a smile on her face. "Let's go inside and take care of the place. What do you think? I've ordered chicken and chips too." It was then Sterling looked her straight in the eye, as if scrutinizing her and her emotions. "My favorite," he merely said as he made his way out of the car, walking up the steps. Genevieve knew that her son wanted to say more but decided not to. He was so much like his father in many ways, and for the first time that day, she was grateful that Sterling wasn't John's biological son. Genevieve walked into the house alongside Sterling, who was gazing around at the spacious interior. The house was bigger than it had seemed from the outside, with high ceilings and large windows that let in plenty of light. But it was clear that John had been wrong about calling it a shack. Despite it being a mess, with dust and cobwebs covering every surface, it was still a strong house. "Well, buddy, it looks like we've got our work cut out for us," Genevieve sighed, rolling up her sleeves. Sterling nodded, still looking around. "Let me check the attic for what we would use. There should be a vacuum cleaner somewhere." "Just be careful, buddy," she called out, watching him make his way up to the attic. He emerged back into the living room less than 5 minutes later. Together they began to clean the house from top to bottom. They dusted and vacuumed, scrubbed the floors and wiped down the counters. Genevieve showed Sterling how to use a mop and how to clean the windows until they sparkled. As they worked, the house began to transform. The dust and dirt disappeared, revealing the real beauty of the house. The hardwood floors that were once so dusty shone brightly, just as the windows sparkled. It all changed the overall look of the house. Genevieve and Sterling continued to work tirelessly, taking breaks only to eat and rest. But as the hours passed, their hard work paid off. The house began to feel like home, little by little. As they finished up the last of the cleaning, Genevieve turned to her son with a smile. "You know, kiddo, I think we make a pretty good team." Just as Sterling was about to reply, she saw the twitch in his eyes and the way his hands trembled. The sitting room, though sparkling clean, was devoid of any form of warmth. Genevieve's eyes scanned the room, landing on the old stove in the corner. She remembered seeing some discarded wood planks in the backyard and decided to try and use them for firewood. But as she struggled to break them into smaller pieces, she realized it wasn't going to be easy. "Why don't we go see if we can get an axe from our neighbors?" She held her hands tightly, trying to keep herself warm like her son was also trying to do. "What if we aren't welcomed?" Sterling asked the very question on her mind. She smiled, holding him by the hand, and strode out of the house. They made their way to the neighbor's house, hoping against hope that they might have an axe or something she could use. The house just next to them seemed to be just as quiet as theirs before they came in. Genevieve really hoped that the people here would be kind-hearted to help them out. Sterling has seen enough heart-wrenching things just in a day. She wasn't ready for that to still continue. They stood before the door of the big house, painted in a beautiful shade of ash. Sucking up courage, she finally knocked on the door, awaiting someone to respond, but seconds flew by and no one answered. Sterling shared a glance with his mother before knocking again, a bit more louder this time. However, nothing changed at all. Genevieve was about to knock again when the door slowly creaked open, revealing an old woman. "Can I help you, dear?" the woman asked, her eyes first on Genevieve, before her gaze settled on Sterling. The woman smiled warmly, waiting for the lady before her to give her a reply. "I'm sorry for disturbing you at this time. We just moved to this house and we are in dire need of an axe." The woman slowly shook her head. "I don't have any, but come in. Don't stand out here in the cold. You'd freeze to death." The woman stepped aside, revealing a cozy living room behind her. Genevieve hesitated, not feeling so comfortable about just entering a stranger's house. But Sterling's shivering firm beside her made her think again. She couldn't just let him suffer in the cold. Even if she could take in the cold, he couldn't. With a quiet nod, she held Sterling's hand and entered the woman's house. The warmth that greeted them as soon as they walked in was all they needed at that point. Fire crackled at the fireplace, giving a soft glow in that area. Genevieve's gaze finally landed on the woman, taking in the way she looked. The woman was clearly as old as her dead mother would have been, but she still looked more beautiful, like a well-worn book that grew precious with time. Overall, her frame was sturdier than anyone she has seen her age. The house was just as beautiful as the woman. The walls were decorated with hand-drawn characters that Genevieve suspected to be drawn by a little child. Taking a quick sniff, she could swear that the woman was baking something. Genevieve felt a pang of envy, wishing her home could be as welcoming. As they settled by the fireside, the woman handed them cups. Hers was filled with steaming tea, and Sterling's was hot chocolate, his favourite. "I'm Elaine. I didn't get your name earlier." Genevieve gasped, a bit embarrassed. "Forgive my manners. I'm Genevieve, and this is my son, Sterling." She took a glance at her son, who was busy with his hot chocolate. You must be quite cautious, Genevieve. Don't worry, I don't bite." Genevieve's cheeks flushed, but she didn't deny it. Elaine leaned forward. "Tell me, what brings you to this old house?" "I thought it was abandoned after no one came to check on it." Her gaze dropped as she sipped the tea. It wasn't abandoned. She said nothing more, even though she perceived that Elaine wanted to hear more. I see. Well, it's clear you're not just passing through. You're staying, at least for a little while." Genevieve nodded, feeling a sense of relief wash over her. She was beginning to think that Elaine would press on with the questions. However, there was something about Elaine that put her at ease, despite her initial reservations. Her mind wandered to the scenes that happened earlier that day and she couldn't help but wonder what John was doing now. What she was sure about, though, was that he wasn't in the same situation as they were. He was probably in bed with the new chick he used to replace her. She couldn't help the sad smile that formed on her face. It was far better than crying again. She didn't notice Illyria's attempts to get her attention, too caught up in her own thoughts. It wasn't until Elaine's gentle touch on her arm that she snapped back to reality. "Genevieve, dear, I was calling your name," Elaine smiled softly. "I have spare rooms upstairs, and you're both welcome to stay the night. In the morning, I'll call someone to come and do the repairs on your house." Genevieve's instincts kicked in, and she shook her head. "No, Elaine, you've done enough already. We can't impose on you like that." "Nonsense, child. You're not imposing. I want to help, and besides, it's not safe for you to go back to that cold, dark house tonight." Genevieve hesitated, surprised at the offer that Elaine threw to her, but she didn't want to be a burden. "Really, Elaine, we'll be fine. We can—" Elaine's hand on her arm stopped her. "Genevieve, listen to me. You're not going back to that house tonight. You're going to stay here, where it's warm and safe, and in the morning, we'll get your house fixed up and you can go back to your life. But for now, just accept my help, okay?" Genevieve's resistance crumbled under her persistence, seeing that Elaine wasn't about to allow no for an answer. "Okay, thank you, Elaine." Genevieve bundled up and headed back to her house, surprised by how cold it was, suddenly. She quickly gathered some essentials, clothes, toiletries, and Sterling's blanket, and returned to Elaine's house. As she entered, she spotted Sterling fast asleep on the couch, his tiny chest rising and falling with each breath. Elaine smiled and nodded towards the stairs. "Let me show you the rooms." Genevieve followed, carrying Sterling as her eyes adjusted to the dimness of the upstairs hallway. The same decorations on the living room walls were taken a step further in the hallway. This time, it looked more mature. Elaine showed her 2 rooms, just by each other. She quickly placed Sterling, who mumbled something in his sleep, on the bed, putting his blanket over him. But as she gazed at her son on the bed, she felt uneasy. She didn't want to sleep alone tonight, given how the day went for her. As if sensing her hesitation, Elaine lingered by the door. "You know, Genevieve, you're welcome to share a room with Sterling if you'd like. I know how it can be with mothers and their children." Genevieve's eyes met Elaine's, wondering if she was so easy to read or Elaine just had that 6th sense. "Thank you, Elaine. I think I'll do that." It was a few hours before Genevieve was finally able to get some sleep, and before she finally let go of reality, tears dropped from her eyes, both in gratitude and shock. At least, in all that happened, she didn't lose entirely. The next day, Genevieve stood in the cold and poorly lit room, watching as Elaine's son, Winslow, examined the ancient furnace. His rugged features seemed chiseled from granite. His jawline was sharp and unyielding. His eyes, she noticed, were mostly a deep shade of blue, concentrating on the metal beast before him. Initially, she mistook him for the handyman, not until Elaine introduced him as her son and the person who would handle her repairs. Elaine also mentioned something about him being a firefighter. The furnace was a hulking mass of dust and decay because it had been dormant for a very long while. There were cobwebs all around it, alongside a thick layer of dust. Genevieve wondered how it had managed to function at all. "This thing's a relic. I'm surprised it didn't blow the whole house to Kingdom Come." "Thank heavens that my mother had no axe," Winslow said. Genevieve, who was standing by his side, felt defensive all of a sudden. "Hey, it's not that bad. It just needs a little TLC." "TLC? This thing needs a miracle. Or a wrecking ball," he grunted, shaking his head. "Well, it's not like I had a choice. It came with the house." Winslow snorted, causing her to want to shout in frustration. "Yeah, well, the previous owner probably wanted to get rid of it, along with the rest of this dump. Hey, this house has character. And it's not a dump." Her eyes bored deep into the back of his head. If looks could kill, he would have been gone a long time. "Character? You mean like the leaky roof and the creaky floors? Yeah, real charming." Elaine cleared her throat loudly, interrupting the duo. Winslow, dear, that's enough. Genevieve, why don't you go help me with some lunch? Sterling will be home soon and you haven't gotten groceries yet. Without another word, Genevieve calmed herself down, knowing it was too childish of her to throw a tantrum. But just as she stepped out of the house, she could swear that he muttered something annoying about her. How could she have known that the person that Elaine said would help her out was the woman's 35-year-old son? He was just 5 years older than her, yet he seemed much bigger and ridiculously handsome. He was quite annoying, all right. It wasn't worth her time, though. Elaine was already doing her more than a favour by allowing her to stay, having a roof over her head and that of her son. If not for Elaine, she couldn't imagine how she would have prepped herself to wake up Sterling and get him ready for school, in a house that needed multiple repairs. Sterling was becoming a big boy little by little. He told her this morning with his chin raised high that he could take care of himself in the bathroom. 3 years ago, he was the one who would cry, waiting for her to do that. Genevieve entered the warm kitchen, allowing the aroma of freshly baked bread to envelope her. Elaine stood at the counter, putting some spice into what Genevieve knew was stew. She joined her immediately, wanting to be of use for once. I grew up an only child, Genevieve, Elaine started to say as she turned to the window side, where she could comfortably see Genevieve's house from. My parents were older, and they lavished all their love and attention on me. But sometimes, I felt so lonely. I longed for a sibling to share my secrets with, to play with, to fight with. Genevieve's hands paused, wondering what prompted Elaine to start talking about her childhood out of the blue. But then I met my husband, and he became my everything. We had Winslow, and our little family was complete. Or so we thought. We wanted more children, but life had other plans. My husband passed away, and I was left alone with only Winslow to care for. It broke my heart, Genevieve, to think that I'd never get to experience the joy of motherhood again. Genevieve could relate a bit to what Elaine was saying. I'm so sorry about that. Oh, it's nothing. It's just that seeing the way you and Winslow acted earlier, it made me imagine what the house would have been like if I had another child. Just as she was about to speak, the kitchen door burst open and Sterling strode in, his backpack slung over his shoulder with an excited grin on his face. Hey, Mom! Guess what? We did a science experiment today and it was so cool. We made a volcano erupt. And then in gym class, I scored a goal. Oh, and I forgot to tell you, I got an A on my math test. Elaine's face lit up immediately and she enveloped Sterling in a hug. That's amazing, sweetie. I'm so proud of you. Winslow walked into the kitchen at that point as his nose twitched from him sniffing the air. He let out a sigh before his eyes landed on the bit whose eyes were fixated on him. A small smile played on his lips as he approached him. Hey, little man. Sterling's eyes widened slowly as he took in Winslow's imposing figure. Whoa, you are huge. Yeah, I get that a lot, Winslow chuckled, shrugging at his statement. Genevieve moved closer to her son, holding him by the shoulders. Sterling, that's not a polite thing to say. Apologize to Winslow. Sterling's face flushed, and he looked down at his feet. Sorry, Winslow. No worries, little man. I'm used to it. Genevieve smiled, her eyes meeting Winslow's in a brief moment of understanding. Well, let's get some lunch, shall we? Sterling, why don't you go wash your hands, and we'll get started. As Sterling scampered off, Genevieve turned to Winslow, apologetic. Sorry about that. He can be a bit enthusiastic sometimes. Like I said, I'm used to it. Kids are always curious about the big, scary firefighter. Genevieve merely smiled, seeing him in another light. The next few weeks were as fast as one would see lightning in the sky. She did her best to keep herself busy when Sterling wasn't around her. Elaine had also kept her company on multiple occasions. One of those days she broke down in tears, remembering what her ex-husband did to her, but Elaine simply held her, not asking questions. The words were on the tip of her mouth, about to spill to Elaine that her cheating ex-husband just served her divorce papers. Those words were never spilled, and Elaine didn't ask about it even days after. She grabbed the dishes that she had borrowed from Elaine and headed out the door, making a mental note to also buy new cookware for the kitchen. Sterling would be back soon, so she needed to do this as fast as she could. Just as she locked the door and turned, she noticed an exotic car pull up at Elaine's gate. A young girl looking younger than Sterling hopped out of the car and eagerly waved goodbye to the driver before skipping into the house. Genevieve was more curious when Winslow appeared out of nowhere, standing by the gate, as if waiting for the driver to notice him. It was then that a stunning woman, with long, dark, silky hair, made her way out of the car, looking a bit flushed. Winslow and the woman began to speak to each other in low tones. From the creases on Winslow's forehead, she suspected that they were having an argument, but she was far away to make out what they were saying. Not that it was any of her business. The man did his best to annoy her each time he saw her. Feeling like an intruder, she hesitated, unsure whether to stay back and return the dishes later or go on. Just then the woman stormed off, leaving Winslow standing alone by the gate, his eyes still fixed on the car as it drove away. Winslow put his hands through his hair in frustration. As he turned to go back into the house, his eyes met with hers immediately before he finally nodded and went into the house. Genevieve didn't need anyone to tell her to postpone giving Elaine the dishes until next time. She wondered why Winslow's eyes flashed anger at her. It felt more raw than anger itself. 2 days later, Genevieve couldn't avoid going to Elaine's place anymore. Sterling had come bearing questions from Elaine, who he now saw as his own grandmother. She knocked twice before the door opened, and the little girl she saw earlier that week stood before her, smiling. "Hi, I'm Anna." Now, Genevieve couldn't help the smile that spread across her face. It was then she saw that Elaine was behind Anna. "I haven't seen you in a while. This is Anna, Winslow's daughter." Her smile froze as she processed the introduction Elaine just gave. Winslow's daughter? She hadn't expected that. That explained the uncanny resemblance between Winslow and his daughter. She had thought him to be mostly gruff and annoying, but now, realizing that he has a child, made her think him to be a softie. "Winslow's daughter?" she blurted out as she stepped into the house, walking to the kitchen to place the dishes there. "That's right, my mini-me." Genevieve turned to see Winslow standing in the doorway, looking at her amusingly. He was leaning against the frame with his arms crossed. "Wow, I didn't know you were a father." She looked away from his gaze. Winslow raised an eyebrow. "Yeah, well, I'm full of surprises." "Surprises, my foot," she muttered to herself, walking up to him. "You are so gruff and intimidating. Believe it or not. Now, can you excuse me?" He put his hand over the doorpost, blocking her way. "Gruff and intimidating. That's not exactly the kind of language I'd use to describe myself." "Well, you have to admit, you can be a bit scary sometimes." "Scary? Me? Never." She couldn't help but laugh, putting her hand over her mouth. "Oh, come on. You're like a big, tough firefighter. I'm sure you've got a soft spot somewhere in there." "Don't go getting any ideas about me being soft, got it? I'm all tough and rough around the edges." "Yeah, right. That's why you have a daughter who looks so cute and just like you. You're a total softie." Winslow's face turned red, and he looked away, muttering under his breath. "Shut up, Genevieve." "What's the matter, firefighter? Can't handle a little teasing?" Elaine tapped her son on his arm, making him move aside reluctantly. "Enough banter, you two. Winslow, why don't you take Genevieve and Sterling along to the park with Anna? She didn't want to be alone." He started to say something but stopped midway. "I can take Sterling, but—" "I understand. I'd just get him ready then." She used that opportunity to excuse herself from their midst and moved to the sitting room, where Anna and Sterling were drawing an object. "Sorry, Anna. I have to get Sterling ready for the picnic. Just give—" Anna grinned wide, allowing Genevieve to see some of her missing teeth. "You are coming," she screamed loudly, jumping to her feet. "Genevieve, I'm sorry, I didn't mean it that way." Holding Sterling's hand, she smiled. I know. I have other things to attend to while you guys are gone. Can you come with us, please? I know we started off quite roughly, but I really want to make it up to you. Winslow looked miserable enough for Genevieve to have second thoughts. She wasn't really offended earlier by his words. It was only that he was quick to dismiss her not being there, which was no problem. Are you sure you aren't doing all these because you can't handle two energetic and hyperactive kids, all on your own? She put her free hand on her waist, giving him a look. Winslow chuckled, low at first before it became louder. I'd take that as a yes. The children screamed, excited. As Genevieve climbed into the truck an hour later, she couldn't help but think about her ex-husband. He never would have taken the time to plan a picnic or play with the kids like Winslow was doing. She felt a bit sick in her stomach as she thought about everything that happened. She wasn't bothered much about it anymore. Months had passed and her son was now settled in school. Sterling was really matured because he understood well what happened at the house. Earth to Genevieve! Winslow snapped his fingers, breaking into her thoughts. Genevieve started looking over at him. Oh, sorry. My mind was just somewhere else, she laughed awkwardly. Winslow raised an eyebrow, giving her a glance as he drove. Everything okay? You looked a million miles away. Genevieve hesitated, unsure if she should share her thoughts. I'll tell you later when the kids aren't around. Winslow nodded gingerly like she had just told him she'd give him the world. Okay, deal? He turned on the music and Genevieve's eyes widened as she recognized the opening notes of Sweet Serenade by the band Switchfoot. She couldn't help but squeal in excitement. Oh my gosh, I love this song, she exclaimed. I've seen them in concert like 5 times. I'm a total fangirl. Who would have thought? Genevieve grinned, feeling a little self-conscious. I used to play their CDs on repeat and dream about meeting John Foreman. I even had a Switchfoot poster on my bedroom wall. Well, I'm glad I could bring back some fond memories for you. As the music continued to play, Genevieve found herself feeling more and more at ease. She glanced over at Winslow, who was watching her with a warm smile. She had totally forgotten that their children were with them as she got lost in the music. At the park, they found a nice spot under a tree, and Winslow spread out a blanket. Genevieve sat down, and Winslow joined her, while the children ran off to play. They watched as Sterling and Anna chased each other around, laughing and shrieking with delight. As they sat there, Genevieve asked Winslow about his job as a firefighter, and he told her everything he had experienced, even up to scaring her at a point. But it was all fun. It was with him that she could finally say that she was a writer and that only one of her books had sold out. As they talked, they discovered they had more in common than they thought. Both were creative, both loved children, and both valued family above all else. The conversation flowed effortlessly, and before long they realized it was time to eat. They unpacked the food and the children joined them, eager to dig in. They sat down together, sharing the food that Elaine had packed up for them. The food in the picnic basket was more than just picnic food. It was everything. As they ate, Genevieve noticed the way Winslow interacted with his daughter, the way he listened to her, and the way he made her feel special. She saw the love in his eyes, and her heart melted. She realized that this tough, gruff man was different with his daughter. As they finished their meal, Winslow suggested a game of tag, and the children squealed with excitement. Genevieve joined in, laughing and running around with the others. For the first time in a long time, she could laugh without feeling sad. As the sun dipped below the horizon, they made their way back to the car, exhausted but happy. Genevieve turned to Winslow and sighed dramatically. Thank you for today. I had a wonderful time. Any time, Genevieve. I'm glad you enjoyed it. The children were already asleep as soon as they got into the car, exhausted from playing. Winslow still played another of her favourite songs from the band. However, this time she stayed put, looking out the window as she thought of all the memories it brought. Her father had a hard time when she was a fangirl. He would lock her inside the room just so she can read. Yet she jumped out the window, causing her father to worry all the time. Only if she could turn back the hands of time just to be in his embrace. She would cry and he'd tell her one of his silly jokes to get on her nerves. The car suddenly stopped, causing Genevieve to jerk forward. "Are we home already?" Winslow merely smiled, opening the side of the door and carrying Sterling first. "Wait here. I'd put him in bed real quick." She watched as the tall, muscular man carried Sterling gently before stretching out his hand for the key. She caught herself smiling as he went into the house and she waited in the car. "Now, do you want to continue smiling at imaginary things?" Not wanting to wake Anna up, she came out of the car, curling her fist at him. "My imaginary character is a worldwide wrestler." They both laughed together at what she had said. She gave him a smile as she went into the house too. As she was about to go inside, he shouted something, but she couldn't make out the words. It was until she had prepped for bed and put everything in place as she wanted, including a hot shower, that she realized what he said and gasped. "Don't get ahead of yourself, Genevieve. Maybe you didn't hear him well too," she whispered to herself, pulling the covers over her head, as if that would stop the thoughts in her head. It wasn't until her eyes closed, about to surrender to sleep, that she smiled, because Winslow had told her that she looked more beautiful. The following months came with frequent picnics and birthday parties, but Winslow didn't repeat what he had said that night, and she didn't bother to ask. It was of no use. One Thursday evening, she decided to drop by Elaine's place to catch up. She knocked on the door, but there was no answer. She tried calling out, "Elaine, are you there?" But only silence replied. Genevieve's heart began to race as she tried the door handle and found it unlocked. She pushed open the door and called Elaine, hoping that no one broke into the house. She pulled out her phone and dialed Elaine's number. "Elaine, where are you? I'm at your house and no one's here," she rapped, trying to sound calm. Elaine's response was a sob. "Genevieve, we're at St. Michael's Hospital. Anna, she's so sick." "What's happening? How sick is she?" Elaine's crying grew louder. "She needs a kidney transplant. The doctors. They say it's the only way to save her life." Genevieve's world stopped. She felt like she'd been punched in the gut. "I'm on my way." She immediately ran out of Elaine's house to her house, instructing Sterling to stay home as she rushed to her car. Her heart raced as she sped towards the hospital. Elaine's sobs still replayed in her head. She burst into the hospital lobby, her eyes scanning the waiting area for Elaine and Winslow. Spotting them huddled together, she rushed over, her heels clicking on the floor. "Elaine, what's happening?" Genevieve asked, softly. Elaine's tear-stained face lifted, her eyes pleading. "Genevieve, Anna, she needs a kidney transplant. The doctors say it's the only way to save her life." Genevieve's breath caught. A kidney transplant? The cost of such a surgery was astronomical. She knew that Elaine and Winslow couldn't afford it on their own. "How much time does she have?" she asked again as gears clicked in her head. "The doctors say we have only a few weeks to raise the funds," Winslow, who had been quiet since, finally spoke. "We've already started a fundraiser, but it's not enough. We're so short on time. They are saying it's going to cost around $500,000. Genevieve's heart sank when she heard the numbers. The amount required was daunting, far beyond what could be realistically raised through a simple fundraiser. She knew she had to say something, anything, to bolster Elaine and Winslow's spirits in this overwhelming moment. "Don't worry, we'll figure something out. I'll help you raise the funds. We'll make it happen." She held Elaine's hands tight. Genevieve hated hospitals because of this kind of situation. In her time, there was no one to reach out to when her mother became sick. Her father did his best to gather funds, but it could do nothing to improve her health. However, Anna wasn't her mother. The girl would survive this. Her gaze strayed to Winslow, taking a good look at him for the first time that day. He looked weary, angry, and frustrated as he was lost in thought. She placed her hand on his knee, trying to reassure him. The only big problem was how they were going to get that large amount of money in a few weeks. Genevieve did her best to mask her shock when they told her the exact amount, because doing that wouldn't do anyone good. She watched as Elaine began to make calls hours later. Winslow paced around the room, his eyes fixed on his phone as he tried to reach his ex-wife, a model who was always busy and never seemed to have time for their daughter. She could sense his frustration growing with each failed attempt. He finally slumped into a chair, his head in his hands, and Genevieve knew she had to act. "Hey," she said softly, sitting down beside him. "How's Anna?" Winslow shook his head, his voice cracking. "No change. And I can't even get my ex to return my calls. She's so caught up in her own world, she doesn't even care that our daughter is fighting for her life." Genevieve put a hand on his arm, trying to calm him down. "We'll figure something out, Winslow. We'll get through this together." But Winslow just shook his head, his eyes welling up with tears. "I don't know, Genevieve. I just don't know." She wrapped her arms around Winslow, holding him tightly as he let out a sob. She held him for a few moments, letting him cry out his frustration and worry. Then, she gently pulled back and looked him in the eye. "I'm going to go get Sterling ready for bed, but I'll be back, okay? We'll face this together." Winslow nodded, his eyes still wet with tears, and she gave him a soft smile before standing up and heading out of the hospital room. Later that night, she tossed and turned in bed, unable to bring herself to sleep. She had rarely seen men cry in her life, so it was actually heart-wrenching when Winslow did. In fact, she understood him better. She would do the same if she were in his shoes. She finally drifted off to sleep, but it was fitful and restless. The next morning she woke up feeling groggy and exhausted. She went through the motions of getting Sterling ready for school, but her heart wasn't in it. She was preoccupied with thoughts of how to help Elaine and Winslow. As the days passed, Genevieve's anxiety only grew. She visited Anna every day, but there was no improvement. The little girl lay in her hospital bed, her tiny body hooked up to machines and wires, her eyes sunken and her skin pale. Winslow and Elaine were always there, not allowing anything to go uncovered. A week went by, and Genevieve felt like she was in a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. Anna's condition remained unchanged, and the medical bills were piling up. Genevieve knew she had to do something, but she didn't know what. And that made her so miserable, eventually. The next morning, Genevieve began to clean out the attic, trying to pass time. Dust was flying everywhere as she lifted old trunks and boxes. She coughed, waving a hand in front of her face. As she reached for an old suitcase, there was more dust in the air, making her sneeze repeatedly. Setting the suitcase, she wiped her hands on her shorts and coughed. As she lifted the lid of the suitcase, the faint scent of old leather wafted out. Her eyes widened as she saw carefully arranged files and an envelope addressed to her. Her heart skipped a beat as she recognized the handwriting to be her father's writing. Her fingers trembled as she unfolded the letter slowly. As she scanned the letter, the paper was already yellowed with faded ink, which meant it had been there for a long while. Genevieve's eyes welled up with tears as she read the note from her father. She had missed him so much since he passed away. Seeing everything made her teary. "Dear Genevieve," the letter began in her father's familiar looping handwriting. "If you are reading this, it means you have made the wise choice to keep the house, despite its age and the memories it holds. I know it hasn't been easy." Genevieve paused, a tear rolling down her cheek. Her father had been gone for years, but his presence felt so near in this moment. He continued, "I wasn't able to give you much while I was here, burdened by my own limitations and the demands of life. But know this, every day I tried to put a little aside, hoping it would someday help you when I could not." At the bottom of the letter, scrawled in shaky letters, was a phone number. "Call this number," he wrote. "Speak to Mr. Thompson. He knows about the small investments I've made. They're not much, but I hope they can help you somehow." With a deep breath, Genevieve wiped her eyes and folded the letter back carefully, placing it on the table beside her. Her mind wandered to Winslow and Elaine at the hospital, facing their own trials. The bond of family felt stronger than ever, a thread weaving through their separate struggles, pulling them together in spirit if not in presence. Gathering her resolve, Genevieve picked up the phone and dialed the number. "Hello?" Genevieve introduced herself, her voice a mix of nerves and anticipation. There was a brief pause on the line, a heavy, thoughtful sigh. "I've been expecting your call, Genevieve. Your father told me you'd reach out eventually. He spoke of you often with such pride and hope." Their conversation meandered through the lanes of casual updates, but as the pleasantries waned, a subtle shift overtook Mr. Thompson's demeanour. His voice, previously buoyant with reminiscence, adopted a gravitas that piqued Genevieve's attention. "Genevieve, you might be wondering who I am, or how I knew your father." Mr. Thompson took a deep breath. "I knew him from a day that could have ended tragically for my family. My son. He nearly drowned in the lake." Genevieve's hand went to her mouth, her eyes widening with shock. "It was a dreadful day," Mr. Thompson continued, "but your father was there. He saved my boy's life. I offered him anything, ready to repay him, but he was a humble man, your father. He refused any material compensation. I had been in finance all my life, and though your father wouldn't take money, he let me help him manage what little he chose to invest." He paused, ensuring Genevieve was following along. "Your father sent small amounts, whenever he could. Over the decades, I've managed those investments. I did my best to ensure they yielded the best returns." Genevieve listened, each word weaving a new layer of understanding about the man her father was and the legacy he left behind. "Did you see the papers in the envelope?" Mr. Thompson's voice brought her back to the present. Genevieve nodded, remembering the thick envelope she had yet to fully examine. "They're all in your name. Stocks, bonds, other investments." Mr. Thompson's eyes twinkled with a hint of pride. "You might want to call your financial advisor to confirm, but last I checked, you are a millionaire." Genevieve's hands trembled slightly as she processed the magnitude of Mr. Thompson's words. A mix of gratitude and wonder washed over her as she realized the depth of her father's foresight and Mr. Thompson's loyalty. "Thank you," she managed to say, her voice thick with emotion. I had no idea." As they continued to talk, Genevieve felt a profound connection to her past, knit together with the unexpected possibilities of her future, all thanks to two men from different worlds, bound by a moment of crisis and a lifetime of gratitude. The first thing that was on her mind as soon as she knew that she had that money was Anna's treatment. The plan to clean the attic was long forgotten already as she rushed down from the attic and grabbed her keys, not even minding to change her clothes. Her heart raced as she rushed to the hospital, the news burning a hole in her pocket. She couldn't wait to share it with Winslow and Elaine. Anna's treatment was no longer a financial burden. Her father had taken care of it from beyond the grave. Genevieve burst through the hospital doors, her determination palpable. "I'm here to help with the treatment costs," she declared without hesitation. Elaine and Winslow were sitting in the waiting area. Winslow, looking worn from worry, gave her a weak smile. "That's really kind of you, Genevieve, but you don't have to—" "Actually, I'm going to cover everything." Winslow's expression shifted to one of confusion, his eyebrows knitting together. "Everything?" he echoed, clearly puzzled. Genevieve laughed lightly, the sound echoing slightly in the busy hospital corridor. "Yes, everything." "Let me explain," she said, her eyes twinkling with excitement. "This afternoon, while I was cleaning out the attic, I found something incredible." Winslow, still lost in his own concerns, seemed not to grasp her meaning. He blinked, the stress lines around his eyes deepening. "I discovered that I'm a millionaire now," Genevieve continued, her voice filled with a mixture of amazement and joy. At that revelation, Winslow's eyes widened dramatically, a mix of shock and disbelief washing over his face. "A millionaire," he stammered, his voice a mixture of doubt and hope. "Yes," Genevieve confirmed, nodding enthusiastically. "Thanks to some investments my father made a long time ago. I can afford this, Winslow. I want to help." Winslow's initial skepticism slowly transformed into relief, his body visibly relaxing as the weight of financial worries began to lift. I don't even know what to say, Genevieve. Thank you, he managed, his voice thick with emotion. Genevieve reached out, squeezing his hand gently. You don't have to say anything. I'm just glad I can do this for you and your family. As they reached the administrative office, she pushed open the door and strode in, gaining attention from the receptionist. I'm here to settle Anna Johnson's bills, she announced, tapping Winslow, who was still shocked. The receptionist looked up, surprised by their sudden arrival. Yes, let me just check. She tapped away at her computer, her eyes widening as she saw the amount due. Okay, that's a significant amount. Would you like to pay by card or... Genevieve cut her off, pulling out her checkbook. I'll write a check. How much do I need to pay? The receptionist's eyes flicked to the amount on the screen. It's $517,000. She didn't hesitate as she wrote the check, wanting to get everything done and over with. As long as Anna's life would be saved. As she handed over the check, the receptionist's eyes widened in surprise. Thank you. Thank you so much, Ms. Genevieve. She quickly processed the payment, her fingers flying across the keyboard. Within minutes, the bills were settled, and Anna's treatment was secured. It was then that she could finally relax, as tears threatened to fall from her eyes. It's done, she whispered. Winslow enveloped her in a tight hug, not minding where they were. Thank you, Genevieve, he whispered into her ear, still holding her tight. Thank you for saving Anna's life. As the days passed, Anna's health began to flourish. Her treatment was aggressive but effective, and she slowly started to regain her strength. Her smile returned, bringing everyone relief. Genevieve visited her every day, alongside Sterling, watching with joy as Anna's progress blossomed. Winslow was always by her side, and they sat together, holding Anna's hands. Sterling was always telling her that he wanted to go see Anna. He would carry all her favorite toys and would sit patiently when she was sleeping. It was only sleep that could remove him from being in the room. One of those days, as Anna slept peacefully, Winslow turned to Genevieve. You did this. You saved her life. His eyes told her more than he even said. He had always thanked her since that day and was persistent on paying her back one way or the other. The day Anna was finally free to go home was a celebration day. Elaine, Winslow, Sterling, Anna and herself all went to get chicken and chips, which was Anna's favourite. Thank you, Genevieve. I never thought I'd be here by this time, smiling this way. I'm always in your debt. Elaine smiled, holding Genevieve's hand as the kids were arguing about football with Winslow. I was in your debt first, Elaine. You took my son and I in, like we were your own children. She squeezed her hand, smiling too. As she brought her attention back to everyone and noticed that Winslow had been staring at her the whole time, Genevieve gazed into the store window, lost in thought. Her eyes wandered to the diamond ring on her finger, and a soft smile spread across her face. She remembered the day Winslow proposed, the way her heart skipped a beat as he got down on one knee. Their relationship had blossomed quickly, and they found themselves inseparable. They spent countless hours exploring the town, holding hands, and laughing together. There was never a time where she felt insecure about his love for her. He was rather the one skeptical, not wanting to make it seem like he wanted her for money, just like her ex-husband. As they stood before the altar exchanging vows, Genevieve knew she had found her soulmate. They spent their honeymoon renovating both houses, exploring restaurants, and taking care of 2 children. Winslow wanted otherwise, but she knew it was best that they stayed back for the renovation because it might be too much for Elaine. Elaine, overjoyed to have grandchildren, was always busy spoiling them rotten. They were always going out with her to her social functions, and she bought them books at every opportunity that she got. Genevieve was more grateful to her father that even in death, he still brought ease to her. Sometimes she wondered what would have happened if she never went to the attic that day. One day, Genevieve stood nervously at the entrance of the bustling restaurant, her eyes scanning for a waiter to lead her to a table. Suddenly, A familiar voice pierced the air, dripping with sarcasm. "Well, well, well, look who's here." It was John, her ex-husband, standing smugly beside a young woman. "Are you our waiter? Lead us in," John joked mockingly before letting out a forced laugh. He didn't stop there, though. "Still living in that old shack you got from your dad?" he asked, his tone laced with disdain. Before Genevieve could respond, her heart pounding in her chest, Winslow emerged from the restroom, his brows knitted together in concern as he took in the scene, his wife looking distressed and a stranger chuckling beside her. Instinctively, Winslow knew this must be John. With a protective glare, Winslow stepped up behind John and firmly nudged him aside. "Is there a problem here?" he asked Genevieve, his voice calm yet commanding. John, caught off guard by Winslow's size and presence, tried to stand his ground. "You got a problem?" he retorted, trying to mask his intimidation. Seeing the unwavering stance of Winslow, John's confidence waned. As Winslow extended his arm to Genevieve, inviting her to leave the awkward encounter, John's arrogance dissolved into an uneasy chuckle. He glanced from Winslow back to Genevieve, realizing the dynamics had shifted. "No problem here," John mumbled, stepping back to join the young woman who looked equally uncomfortable. "That's what I thought," Winslow said. As Genevieve stood there watching Winslow handle the situation with John, a deep sense of safety enveloped her. Her heart skipped a beat as she gazed at him, feeling her love for him deepen with every passing moment. This feeling wasn't just about the immediate protection he had provided, it was about his continual support and kindness that had consistently fortified their life together. In that bustling restaurant, amidst the clinking of dishes and the murmur of conversations, Genevieve felt a profound gratitude for everything that had led her to this moment. She silently thanked her father, not just for the tangible legacy he had left her, but for the intangible lessons he had imparted. Kindness and love, most importantly toward those who truly deserved it. As she held Winslow's hand, feeling the warmth of his touch, she felt a powerful affirmation of her choices and the journey she had navigated. That evening, amid the soft glow of the restaurant lights, Genevieve knew she was exactly where she was meant to be, loved, cherished, and deeply protected.